My name is Nathan, and this is Laura. We're from OCAD University, and this video dialogue is part of the FemTechNet initiative. We're going to be discussing how popular media is used as a tool for creating and perpetuating certain representations of gender.
All right, so we noticed that like representation of gender is sort of, there's stereotypes all over popular culture, and it even goes down to like the cellular level. And so one of the articles in our readings is Emily Martin's article, and it's called The Egg and the Sperm, How Science Has Constructed a Romance Based on Stereotypical Male-Female Roles. And so in the article she talks about how science has constructed this idea that the sperm is a sort of heroic savior that comes to save the passive egg. And interestingly how even though science has sort of advanced and found that the egg has not a passive role at all, it's equal if not potentially more involved, the language around reproduction is still sort of the same, and even sometimes goes the other way to sort of represent the egg as this sort of femme fatale that traps the sperm, and it's this sort of dangerous thing. And so Martin sort of encourages a cybernetic model, which is the idea of being a little bit more flexible in how we talk about science and technology, and sort of understanding that we may not know everything right now, and it will change and evolve as we go along.
Right, and I think a good example in terms of that is the use of gender stereotypes in Trojan condom advertisements, and that's sort of one way we can connect these images of sexual reproduction with these representations in the media, and how they further perpetuate perhaps negative images of male and female roles in relation to these. So we've seen Emily Martin talk about how this language often changes, but it still perpetuates those same dominant, normalized perceptions of male and female reproduction. So that concept is interesting in itself. Now Trojan represents this macho man, and has all this sort of imagery related to this strong masculine identity that they associate with this sexually related contraceptive technology. So it's interesting how they perpetuate the idea of the sperm as very strong in going through this arduous journey to penetrate the egg, being that, you know, that's not necessarily true in biology. And so we see this through popular culture and media, how these representations are perpetuated in different ways.
Yeah, and so that kind of ties into another point in how female sexuality in particular is represented in sort of different ways, I think, in the media. So it's either sort of chaste or this hypersexual idea, and if you don't sort of fall into one or the other, then you're sort of seen as other or dangerous in some way. And I think a good example of this is someone who's sort of challenging the norms of how how women should act, and how they should sort of, like, how they should be represented sexually, and then also how their bodies should look. And an example of this would be Petra Collins, and so she's actually a fellow OCAD student, and so she has been getting some media attention for two things recently. So one is this t-shirt that she made, and it's like a simple line drawing, it's not like a photo or anything, and on an American Apparel t-shirt, and it shows like a menstruating vagina, and so it's obviously pretty shocking to a lot of people, and she's gotten a lot of negative comments from it, people saying like, this is disgusting, why are you doing this? And it's sort of, I think it's interesting that people find this so offensive in culture when there are so many things like, you know, representations of hyper-violence and stuff like that is seen as just run-of-the-mill, whereas something that is, you know, pretty harmless is seen as dangerous. And then another Collins example is that she had her Instagram account recently deleted, and she wrote a big post about it. And basically it was because she posted a photo of herself in her underwear and it was showing pubic hair, and there was no nudity or anything like that. It didn't violate any terms of Instagram's terms of use, but someone reported it as obscene, or and it was her account was promptly deleted. And so it's kind of like, if you don't fall into these norms, you're punished for it as a woman, and I think that's really interesting.
Right, and it's interesting to see how these potentially subversive images threaten these things in such an extreme way. Do you think there's value in these subversive images in creating dialogue or promoting discussion around this?
Yeah, I think it's like worth examining, like, why are all the people who may have reported her photo as obscene on Instagram, like, it'd be really interesting to get those people talking about why that image is so offensive to them. Like, what is it about just pubic hair that is like so particularly shocking, when there are pictures of women's bodies all over the internet showing much more like skin and stuff like that that are accepted. But if it's not, like I said, sort of the norm, it's seen as something bad.
Right. So like you talked about the cybernetic model and allowing more flexible system for defining and understanding things. And Emily Martin discusses that quite a bit in how, perhaps applying it to how we view gender roles in relation to sexual reproduction. And I think that offers pretty valuable tools to critically analyze these examples and see how popular media and graphic imagery and popular culture as a whole perpetuate and support these representations, which almost originated in science, like as you said, at the cellular level. So it's fascinating how it's almost this trickle-down effect from science as that matter of fact that Bruno Latour talks about, and popular media and popular culture as this way to sort of communicate it and further these stereotypes related to it.
Mm-hmm. And so just one more thing I wanted to note about Martin is that she says that when these things are sort of being accepted as the norm at the cellular level, it kind of makes them all the more difficult to fight because they're seen as natural. And so that also ties into how race is also depicted in popular culture. And I guess you want to talk about that?
Right. So there are a lot of connections, obviously, between this idea of biology and reproduction as producing these representations of gender, but this applies also to race in a lot of ways, and how that's depicted in popular culture. Science and representations of difference obviously play a huge role in how people are depicted in these forms of media, and this goes back to the cellular level, and this sort of biological level, where we have these systems of eugenics and physiognomy that try to look at race and ethnicity as a way to determine personality traits or intellect, or these ideas of violence or something related to racial stereotypes. So we have this example, like in terms of what Bruno Latour talks about, these matters of fact applied to race through science. And so this presents very complicated and complex issues in itself in trying to sift through that and see how it emerges in popular culture.
Yeah, so one example of that is the Steve Urkel character from Family Guy, and so he was sort of like a different character for popular culture because he was like a black nerd, and that wasn't really seen very much. And so, his character is always sort of like hapless. He never gets a girl though, so even though it was a bit transgressive, he still sort of never succeeds in being, I guess, accepted by the general culture. And so this is sort of personified by his alter ego that he creates in his lab. So it's this character that's, you know, the complete opposite of him in every way. He's sort of this suave, cool guy that does eventually get the nerd, or sorry, get the girl in the end. So it kind of goes back to these stereotypes of African American sexuality and how it's like the hypersexual is sort of the accepted norm, whereas if you're anything different from that, you're seen as kind of an outcast, an outsider, like the Steve Urkel character. Right,
and in that situation, a lot of people saw it as a break from that system of the stereotypes related to black individuals and black actors, and in the end it proved sort of to be futile because he ended up being this hypersexualized character in order to get the girl. So I think there are other examples of sort of true ruptures or better examples of ruptures in the system, and I think one example of that is a DJ called DJ Spooky, who did an audio and video remix of the film Birth of a Nation. Now, Birth of a Nation was known for its sort of breakthrough in film editing techniques. It developed a lot of cutting and splicing that was remarkable for the time that it was made, but it had these extremely racist undertones based on these stereotypes and sort of biological definitions of race. So DJ Spooky tries to intervene in this by developing not a counter narrative, but one to intersect with this original narrative, which positioned black individuals in America as negative, primitive, these sort of crude stereotypes about them. And I think by intervening in the narrative and by intervening through technology, DJ Spooky offers things similar to these flexible and adaptive environments that we can look at in terms of applying and analyzing these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it kind of all comes back to this idea that Martin is encouraging with the cybernetic model. So that whether it's race or gender, then we need to look past these sort of old stereotypes and realize that they are damaging, and sort of move beyond that and embrace sort of a more flexible way of seeing even things like reproduction that a lot of people think is, you know, it's based in science. In fact, therefore it's true, but it is also very heavily loaded with these sort of ideas about male versus female sexuality and